entirely interactive. So if you think you're just going to get to sit back and listen, you're in the wrong place. So we're about to talk about something that is really close to my personal areas of interest, and it's been on Gio's mind for a long time. And it's kind of the convergence of two different pieces of work, threads of work that we've been trying to play out, and that is culture and collaboration. So we're going to talk about how do you create the internal culture you need to be good collaborators. And I have to say, part of this aha, so I'm going to start with a personal failure story. Part of this aha for us about the internal needs, the moves you have to make internally so that you can both support collaboration well and be good collaborators yourselves, came from my own personal failure at Geo. So I've been running Geo for 14 years. I'm the founding exec. So when I came, it was an idea, and I was the first person through the door. But I knew, first of all, I didn't know anything. Age, at the time I was 29, so you can do that math if you want. But I realized I didn't know. I mean, I had to rely on the intelligence of others. I had to bring people in because I certainly was not the expert on basically anything that we were working on at that time. So I thought that collaboration was in my bones. I thought that I was creating this organization that was 100% from the ground up built to be collaborative. And then years go by, and I'm realizing that we're only engaging in really shallow collaborations. We weren't deeply collaborative, and we tried to kind of dig beneath the surface to see what was really going on there. And what was going on is that everybody, well, one of the things that was going on, there were probably a couple things, was that everybody on my team was filled up to their eyeballs with work. Nobody had the bandwidth to go out and build relationships or try to have those sort of feeling out conversations with the kinds of organizations that we might want to do joint work with. So I had not created the internal context for us to be truly collaborative because everyone had too much on their plates. So a couple years ago, I was finally in the position to try to build in some organizational slack. That's an economic term, but really what that means is bandwidth or white space or what have you, just a little bit of running room so that I and members of my team could go out and try to really forge. You have to build a relationship first. That is an investment that takes time. It is not something that's going to pay off on your work plan that year, and you've got to create the space for it. So that was something that I had failed to do for years and years and years and hadn't even really realized it. It hadn't dawned on me that that was what was going on until longer down the road. So that was a structural barrier that was in place, right? There was a structural barrier to collaboration that I, as the leader, had not broken down. And so I think that happens inadvertently to all of us. To all of us, we sometimes are talking the talk and not walking the walk, not intentionally, but just because there are some things that are getting in the way. And we have to think really hard and be quite self-reflective to figure out what some of those things are. And sometimes it's time. A lot of times it's time. When I hear grant makers complain about those nonprofits, they need to collaborate more. I keep on thinking, give them general operating support and fund them for multiple years in a deep way, and I bet you that behavior will shift some. But when you're focused very narrowly on program restricted work that I need the branding around because I need to convince you that I'm the person you should give the money to, the incentives are all a little bit out of whack. So that's just, I'm trying to set a tone here of disclosure and honesty. And so I wanted to just tell that story first to share with you what I've been kind of thinking about and learning internally in my own shop. As I open up a question for all of you, we're a small enough group that I want everybody to introduce themselves and say something about either what's on your mind related to collaboration and how you embody that internally. Is that something that you even prioritize? If not, is it something you would like to prioritize? Just say a little bit kind of about why you're in this room. Why did you choose to come to this conversation today? So we're going to have everybody do that. Who's brave? I won't just call on someone. Well, maybe I will, and if I do, it's going to be you, Ellen. So if anyone else would like to go first to save Ellen that I always call it the person I know best in the room. Thank you.
I think that for me, it's...
And tell us who you are.
Everyone.
I don't think she knows.
Yes.
I know. She came to
Does
our
anyone
conference.
not know?
Will you just
I'm Laura
model
McBride.
the behavior?
I'm Laura McBride. I work at APS in the corporate giving area, and I support our foundation. And I think for me, one of the reasons I want to seek out how we can collaborate better is because I feel like we're all doing good work, but it's in isolation, and that we could have more impact if we figured out how we could pool our resources, identify issues, and tackle them.
Totally. I'm just taking some notes about the things you guys are talking about. Anyone, do you want to go next? Or we can go around. Everyone's going to have to go, so. Yes. No, go ahead.
Should we just go around the table?
Sure.
Okay.
Be organized.
That's right. I am Gene D'Adamo with the United Mason Pulliam Charitable Trust. And collaboration is something we talk about a lot at the Trust, as we did in my work with Laura at the Republic. What we really want to focus on is true collaboration with the nonprofit partners and getting it from that funder, grantee relationship to a true partnership where we can succeed and fail together, and we are truly in it for the long haul, and we can course correct, and we give you a multi-year grant, and we can let you go.
That's great.
And true collaboration. We've had some examples of really success in that, and some probably more examples where it's not been successful. I think it's most set our work, truthfully, as a funder.
And that's great that you're owning it. I mean, at least part of it's on you, right? It's always
Yeah.
part of it is on us because it's about a relationship. Well, I really appreciate that focus, and also I'm sure you're trying to pay attention to the power dynamic and how do you level that? And when you think about trying to level the power dynamic, that's on us. You know, it has to be the people, you know, the folks who have the power who have to work harder at leveling the power dynamic. That's just the only way it works. So I really appreciate that you guys are so focused on that. Kelly, do you want to say anything?
Sure. I'm Kelly Solomkin with the Arizona Grantmakers Forum, and I'm looking forward to today and learning how we can better be partners with all of you in working collaboratively in the way that you want to.
Well, I mean, I should have said this at the outset. Groups like the Arizona Grantmakers Forum, their whole mission is to help with collaboration, right? You know, and ours too. We're trying to make connections. We're trying to help set you guys up for success so that you multiply your power in the community, not power, but your potential in the community. And so it's, you know, you guys are experts at that. Can we go over to this table, Erin?
Erin.
Yeah.
I'm Erin Goodman from Piper Trust. I think I'm particularly mindful of the issue of collaboration around the work with our Capacity Builders Network that we have going, and other ways that I can do capacity building work within the trust and out in the community in a way that fits for us logistically, that can still, you know, have more impact and collaboration. So something I chew on.
And say one more sentence about the collaboration. I mean, the capacity building network. Are you working with others?
So yeah, several people in the room are part of that group. It's just kind of a working group of people who are involved in capacity building, and we get together to try to crack some nuts together.
You couldn't tell a formal or informal.
Yeah. It's an informal.
It's pretty informal.
Yeah.
Several of the AGS members, and we also have the AGS participates in it, and then also the Alliance of Arizona Nonprofits.
And some practitioners.
Yeah.
Drug practitioners as well. So it's a blend.
Wonderful modeling to have the nonprofits in the room. Ellen.
Hi, I'm Ellen from Piper Trust. I'm a little bit of a skeptic, to be honest. I'm a little bit of a collaboration skeptic. I'm like, can't I just do my thing? So
I'm glad I didn't pick on you.
And I suspect, and I think it comes down because I suspect that maybe I don't have the skill set to do it, because I'm worried that, you know, maybe collaboration in my mind means bringing everybody together and making impact in an incredibly complex social problem. So I'm actually hoping that I'll come away with some of my hands for me today and realize that collaboration doesn't have to mean that, and what can it mean, and just to make me feel less frightened of it.
Right. Right. Oh, that's
So that
so.
was super honest.
So thank you. That's so amazing. I love it. That's why I told my failure story before you guys talked, because this. What is it that until it's a little bit painful, you're not really in the learning zone, right? Like you have to push until it's a little bit tough. Can we come to this table?
Sure. I'm Mary Thompson with Legacy Foundation. I've been at the foundation for about 10 years now. I'm vice president, so I'm basically in charge of grant making for the Phoenix area. A couple of lifetimes ago, I kind of forged my career on collaborations. I worked for a quasi-governmental agency called MAG, and most of my job was around bringing together stakeholders, both at the city county level, state level, but also a lot of people who I know in this room worked with me early back in those days when they were with corporations. And so it was very exciting, and I feel like we did a lot of great work in the community. It didn't last at the level that it was at that point. So now that I'm at this organization, I feel like we work collaboratively, but we haven't intentionally set a mind frame of working collaboratively. So we'll embrace a nonprofit at the early stages of where they're at often, and really support them ongoingly for 3 to 5 years with investment. But we don't really intentionally talk about it. This is what we're going to do, and this is what we want to see. So I would like to bring more of a methodical approach to my work, because we are small, and we've got about a $5 million investment annually, which is not a lot. How do we really begin to do that more mindfully? And then also just with my other fellow
What did you say?
my other fellow project partners.
Oh
as
yeah.
well.
Yeah, exactly. That's great. Thank you.
Cheryl Ruggiero, and with the Thunderbirds, we are, we're an organization, these guys all know, but I'll tell you, we're an organization, we do the waste management, golf tournament in town.
Okay.
We give back all the proceeds.
Oh gosh.
But
yes.
we're very limited, we aren't able to do multi-year,
Yeah,
we're
yeah.
not, we don't do general operating,
Yeah.
so I have to walk through with my charities, okay, well, your programs, there's all of this, that, anyway. So
Yeah.
I'm always talking to my colleagues here going, okay, well, what do you know about these guys, or what are you working on, and how can we maybe partner? So maybe Jean's crew is doing multi-year, but there's still some
There's gaps. Yeah.
things that we can fill in, so I'm always out there.
There's
Like,
always
what are
gaps.
you doing? What can we do?
That's great. Well, I mean, I think that's a wonderful philosophy or approach to grant making, which is to rely on your colleagues who either have a deeper knowledge in a particular area, or they have the bandwidth.
It's not because I'm trying to get out of work, you guys.
Frankly, that's one of those things that helps the grantees so much, is if you don't have to go do the deep due diligence again, because Jean did it, or whatever, or the deep evaluation one, because that Piper's doing it. I think that's a great way of trying to combine what you about said something.
No, it's true, I just like,
That's it. Okay. I can't see your name.
Hi, I'm Angie Harmon. Yeah, and I work for Freeport McMoran. We're a mining company over here in Phoenix. I support our foundation. And we're talking a lot. We're very place-based in our giving in the communities where we have a presence. And so collaborating, for those communities to survive, collaboration is necessary.
Yeah.
And it's also not, it doesn't happen a lot. So that's something that we are focusing quite a bit with our capacity building work in those communities. We partner with the Issue Lodestar Center here to do work in our operating communities, and that's one of some of the work we're going to be doing this year is specifically around help, modeling that collaboration model in these communities. And because from our perspective, we're looking at it from a project development piece of what they're coming to us for funding for. So we're looking at how do we build up the communities now, because we're not always going to be there. So what are we doing now to build those things, which collaboration is almost the foundation of that in these communities. It's hard, and it's multi-sector, and to collaboration is a lack of leadership. And so what element does that come into play with?
The lack of leadership on whose part?
In communities.
Gotcha. So
There's
they're
not bench
rural, are they
strength.
rural, and there's a outflux of talent and all that stuff? Yeah.
Yeah, so that how all those pieces connect together and how you can use collaboration as an underlying tool to address those issues.
Yeah. We definitely have a lot of members of GEO who work predominantly in rural communities, and one of them was talking about how do you dance with who's in the gym, right? Like like this is the possibility set is right here in front of us, and we have to figure out how we lift up the folks who are here, and that's a different challenge. Really, it's an important one. Charles, right?
Charles, right.
Yes.
I observe that we are simply trying to catch up with our children and grandchildren, depending upon your age. If you're younger, it's a child. In my case, it's a grandchild. When I was in college 100 years ago, we were forbidden to collaborate. We had to write all our papers by ourselves. They threatened all sorts of things if you got help from somebody and so forth and so on. Well, that has all changed now. And my granddaughter, who is in 8th grade, is everything she does is collaboration. They have a project and they are collaborating with a committee they have. They aren't doing it individually. When they're writing papers and so forth, they are encouraged and directed to collaborate. So what I think we're doing is simply catching up with our kids and grandkids. And that may mean that going forward, when these people are moved out into the world, they will be attuned to this, and it won't have the difficulties that we are encountering today.
Such a wise thought, absolutely. I mean, I think that there is a little bit, with several things that are in our society, it feels like as the generations transition, some of the things that we struggle with so mightily now are just going to kind of go away or be a lot lessened just because of the nature of who these kids are and how they're being brought up. That gives me a lot of hope. It gives me a lot of hope, Charles. Do you want to go? You guys want to go next, and then I'll go back to this table over here. Sure. Francis.
So I'm interested in.
Does everyone know who you are?
Yes, I'm Raquel Gutierrez from St. Luke's Health Initiatives. I'm the director for strategic planning and strategic learning and practice. And what interests me about this conversation around collaboration, and I think it is similar to the two things that were mentioned here, so this work within the community with the folks you work with, but then also internally within your organization, how do you do this, and with other funders, are the human dynamics that actually underlie that work. It doesn't matter where you're doing collaboration. Collaboration is collaboration is collaboration. And so what would it take for us as a community of funders to really understand those dynamics and be honest about them? So when you talk about fear, when you talk about ego, when you talk about power, and so that's very intriguing to me because it has multiple applications. I'm always striving and encouraging my peers to help us build a collective voice around some of these kinds of concepts, so that we're not just all using the same word with different bubbles, meanings in the bubbles. And I think it actually can benefit us as a larger community, not just in terms of our local work, but also in terms of how we interact and contribute to the larger national community of funders, and then in our individual grant-making work.
Wow, that just really resonates with me. We're in the midst of something that's a new initiative called the Change Incubator. I don't know if anyone has heard of it, but we're working with Cambridge Leadership Associates, and these are folks that have a lot of experience in adaptive leadership, and they're helping us really call out the self, the personal role in whatever it is, but in leading change, in collaboration. And And it's hard, you know. I actually was listening to Brene Brown's Rising Strong on the plane on the way here, so I'm kind of in that space right now because that's a lot of what she's talking about. But I think that we've been kind of we have sterile conversations about this stuff. You know, we try to make it academic, we try to make it logical and linear and all of these things, but it's about loss. You know, it's about things that you have to give up because you're moving towards some other common whole. There's something that you're leaving behind, and we have to talk about that. And I think that philanthropy is particularly guilty of not wanting to go to the emotional, not wanting to go to what it's felt, what is my felt experience in whatever the thing may be.
Suzanne Feaster, CEO of St. Luke's Health Initiatives. Two things. When there's been a change in leadership in a number of the foundations here, myself and Jean and Sue have been in, we've been joking with each other that we're still feeling our way through, but we all really get along and we have a lot of fun. It's therapy it's a support group when we all get together and have therapy. But from that camaraderie has come all kinds of ideas, and we've seen really tangible. It's not like they didn't work together before, but I think I can say that they're working even better now.
Yeah.
And there's all this camaraderie that feeds on, well, I'm working on that, well, then let's have a meeting. And so we've seen more and more of that as the new kitty corps. The kitty corps that's eligible for AARP has come in and sort of said, well, who made up the rules?
Yeah, right.
Because we've all been able to say, well, that was then, but this is now, let's pitch that. And I think there's been this sense among some of the larger and medium-sized, well, who says we have to follow those rules? And sort of challenging that. So it's been a very interesting time here because I think, and with new leadership at AGF, there's just that sense that we can break down.
Right, the world is your oyster.
Yeah.
You can do it.
And we're seeing very tangible impacts and changes because of that.
Yeah. Well, one of the things we'll talk about today is the leadership traits that are required to be able to collaborate well. And some folks are born with them, and that gets nurtured over time. So other folks, they're learned. But I think if you have a new set, Ellen, right? Is that what you're laughing at? Self-disclosing.
Can I add something to what Suzanne said?
Sure,
I think
please.
so much, and all of us have had great collaborative partnerships over the years, and it really is so based on trust. So if you trust the person, whether it's a colleague, a nonprofit, a member, then that's just the basis of it.
It is.
And then, Laura was saying that too, the egos go away. It doesn't mean, and part of the benefit of working for a foundation versus a corporation, which has a little bit different marketing field, and I can relate to that. No one has to have their name on it.
Right.
It doesn't really matter. So I think that's been so refreshing. That we're all in it. What's the issue? What role do we all play? I trust you. You trust me. There you go. If someone stumbles, you don't immediately assume that they did it to screw you over.
Yeah.
It just happened.
Did you come from a corporate background? Yeah. Well,
Evil
hopefully.
media organization.
Evil media.
I shouldn't say that.
Well, I'm sure it feels. I'm sure it feels like a huge positive jump. Moving over to a field like this, and we're still not anywhere near where we need to be, to work on the complex social issues that we're trying to move on. We've got to really leave that competitive mindset behind. So were you done, Suzanne?
Sorry.
Okay, you were. It's okay. No, that was not. This is great. This is what I'm trying to do. I don't think y'all want me up here talking for an hour. And I'm sorry that I pulled out my phone, but it's because I realized I'm not wearing a watch. And if you guys want to get out of here at whatever time, I need to know what time it is. So let's move it back to you guys.
I'm Terry Wogan-Calderon, Executive Director of Social Venture Partners. And, we are about collaboration, even from a small, from a very micro level, that each one of our partners, we have to collaborate with each other in order to create the impact that we're looking for in the nonprofits. But then we also have to have collaborations with all the nonprofits that we're working with too. And again, I think that we have had many failures. We've had lots of successes, but we've had a lot of failures too, and those are the ones we learn from. And that's why we're doing, that's why we have more successful collaborations. But then compared to the other funders here too, we're a lot smaller. So it's really figuring out where is our role and how do we collaborate with all the other funders in this room and what can we bring to that and the skills that we need to do that. And then also we're part of a network of other SVPs, and so we're starting to look at how do we collaborate with each other to have even more impact globally. So, 3,500 partners strong, how can we really move the needle on something if we all work together? And how do you do that?
That's great. We've always been connected to the SVP.
Yes, I know.
Very proudly. Paul Shoemaker was early on in our leadership, and he's one of the founders of this.
Tina Marie Tintori, and I
Tina
serve.
Marie, is that?
Tina Marie.
Tina.
Yes.
Thank you.
And I serve as the executive director for the APS Foundation. APS is one of our statewide utilities here.
Okay, great.
And also serve as the director of our community affairs for APS, which includes corporate giving. So we have the corporate giving side and then the foundation side. My background actually is in the OD leadership development space. So for collaboration, I always think of it in the terms of like strength finders.
Yeah.
If you're familiar with that. And people that have different strengths, when you put together teams, make a great team. And it's tapping into those strengths that really can excel that team. And I think about in my role, I've been in the APS Foundation now for a year and a half. It's been a role of really kind of assessing and figuring out where we wanted to go and what we wanted to do. The APS Foundation chose STEM as its main focus area back in 2012. And we're reaching a point of maturity in that stage where they're starting to ask questions, our board is, around evaluation, around what are we going to do next. And collaboration kind of becomes necessary at this point, in my opinion. So we started working actually with Angie on identifying organizations that are doing collaborative work and are bringing together funders and organizations that are doing STEM type stuff that we could bring to Arizona. And that to me is adding value to the board for them to see that we're finding these good programs. And that to me was a perfect example of some collaboration. We've been spending some time with the other foundations as well, Helios, and learning about what they do and how we might be able to complement. Helios is this huge organization, and we're a slight little piece of the pie, but how we might have some similarities as far as our goals and what we're trying to do that might align, and we could be partnering in that aspect. So we're exploring a lot of those avenues, and I'm excited about it. It's taking our foundation just to a different level. So.
There's another new leader in this area. You're newish.
Yes. Oh, yes. Definitely.
So under 2 years, I think, is new.
Definitely.
Yes, sir.
Centauri Minor with Social Venture Partners, and just taking a lot from what
Will you tell me your first name again?
Centauri Minor.
Centauri.
Yeah. Taking it from what a lot of people have said is how to effectively do this work when being honest about ego and about ownership, and how do we build a coalition and consensus around any given topic with a number of people where there are different personalities. Again, everyone brings their ego to the table. How are we honest about that, and how do we work through it? And that's something I hope we talk about.
Yes. Well, I mean, what I'm very pleased about is that most of the themes that I was hoping to touch on over the course are they're already in the room. So we'll just go deeper on some of what you guys are already talking about. What do you want to say?
Sure. Well, I'm naturally intrigued with this topic. I think whatever the opposite of what Ellen was talking about is, I think I'm just hardwired to collaborate because I think it's more fun working with a team, a group of people than it is on my own. And then my background is in advocacy, and so we always found at the state capitol that there was safety in numbers, there was power in numbers.
Yeah,
and so
right.
we were always looking for ways to form a coalition with like-minded organizations working toward the same public policy goal. And so I just always am looking to learn more about how we can collaborate.
Well, and your board found the right lady for the job, clearly, so that's great. Yes.
Hi, I'm Penny Alley Taylor, and I'm with Valley of the Sun United Way. And so we're kind of a hybrid organization since we kind of play on both sides of the space there. And I guess we're the advocacy table, and that's what I do in my role at United Way. But I thought this was a really important topic because the more we can collaborate and work together on so many different issues, in my case, what I can learn here and take to work with our elected officials in public policy, that would just be
very, very strong for us to come in the door and have a great network of the nonprofit, philanthropic foundations, and telling them, what we're doing and the interests that we have, and vice versa. Us, how can we do better at collaborating and communicating back and forth? It's not just one way, but it's really a back and forth conversation, and how we can leverage each other's assets and strengths to do better things for our community. Well, and the very nature of advocacy, you can't do it alone. You can't be successful advocates alone. You have to build collective will and mobilize in order to be able to do that well. Me. Did I surprise you?
You did a little bit.
I see you over there.
I'm not going to turn the camera on myself there. I just think it's kind of exciting for me, especially being so new into all this, to see a group of people who are so dedicated to collaborating. I think a lot of times in our day and age, we seem to be drifting apart a lot, and I think that having people who are focused on coming together and driving towards a common purpose, and even though you all fund different areas and vastly different things, that you do find those commonalities and are able to pull your resources and bring it together for the common good.
That's great. Thank you, Nate. Well, fantastic. So this is going to be a great conversation because so many of you are already thinking really deeply about this. You've had really wise observations about what's hard and what you need to do differently. And so the slight twist on the conversation we're going to have here is about how we create the internal context so that we can be good collaborators, right? And Geo, this sort of is an evolution of Geo's own work on this topic. We've always been, Geo's work is always like a play within a play, right? So we're working with funders who want to be effective, and they want to help their grantees be effective. And so on all of these fronts, with collaboration, with learning, with evaluation, with everything, Geo is itself trying to model the work. We're also working with our members to try to be effective at it, and our members are working with their grantees in the same context. So it's kind of hard to figure out which layer you're focused in on. But where we're focused now is, what do we need to do internally? Who do we need to be as leaders so that we're creating a context where collaboration can thrive? And that is collaboration with one another, that is support for grantee collaboration, all of those things. And you see some of the publications that my colleagues mailed out. Sadly, the brand new one is not even in print yet. It's only been released electronically, which I think Kelly is emailing to you or has already emailed to you. Oh, look, yeah, and there it is. And that's really the launching off point for our conversation today, is building collaboration from the inside out. One of my frustrations over the course of my tenure in this field has been when we as funders, kind of cast aspersions or push the focus or the blame externally when things aren't going right. I've heard many times in rooms like this, those nonprofits, and that's never the place to start, right? The place to start is to figure out what it is that we can do differently. And yes, sometimes you might be finding the wrong folks, and yes, there are bad nonprofits out there, but there are also a heck of a lot of good ones. And there are certain things that we are getting profoundly wrong, and focusing on that would be productive. So when you think about culture and collaboration, I wonder if I asked all of you to describe the culture of the organizations that you sit in, whether you'd be able to really effectively do that, because culture is one of those things that it's hard to see sometimes. You're in it, and it takes someone from the outside. So these new CEOs probably can really say something profound about the cultures that they came into, but I will not ask you to do that here. So we do a lot of...
It requires wine.
Wine. We will be doing that later today. But so trying to think of that, what is it, the context, the culture, the behaviors, the assumptions, the values that need to be baked in for us to truly be collaborative. And so as we've started looking at that, there are some things that are about a mindset, and in the networks hub with the little dots and lines, that one, cracking the network code, we talk about these mindset shifts But I want to talk about it a little bit for the moment because you guys have already brought them up, but we can just go into them in a little bit more detail. So you mentioned that everyone brings egos to the table, and that is oftentimes a collaboration killer, right? You know, there can be one bad actor in a situation, and it just kills the whole thing. So the mindset shift that we need to model that, you know, I think because we have the power, if we're not getting it right, we are not encouraging our grantees to operate from this place, but we have to think about mission, like what we're trying to get done, not organization or ego or self. And so when you get that shift, when you actually really do embrace the shift of mission over ego or organization, lots of things open up. But it's really hard because a lot of the incentives are driving in the other direction. I mean, as I mentioned, nonprofit incentives go toward, you know, differentiation. You know, how many nonprofit leaders have been asked by their funders, well, how are you, you know, superior to, differentiated from, et cetera, those others in your class? So that sets up a zero-sum game, and that sets up a tough context for collaboration. There are no easy ways around it, but one of them is to focus on what the work is that needs to get done and to try to figure out what are all the actors that need to be kind of mobilized behind that. The other one that Jean brought up, which I'm really just personally focused on, well, actually, does anyone want to say anything about that? Like, what's hard about putting the work first? What's hard about calling out the egos through in the room? Or how do you manage when that's not going right in a collaboration? I mean, this is like the deal killer, right? This is the thing that happens all the time.
I think if I could, we have two different collaborations going on in Indiana and one in Arizona around animal welfare, which is one of our series. In Arizona, it's a very, very effective, highly collaborative, very, our success rate has been huge. Because we went into it, everyone knew, everyone agreed with it, what the goals were going to be, everyone agreed who was going to lead the effort and all that. And we have someone who takes charge of the meetings. In Indiana, it was more loosely based. There wasn't a clear understanding. So in Indiana, we have some people who, their intentions are great, but they're there to make sure their agency has the most faith in surgery. So this person's there to make sure they do that, and they not focus on the overall good of the bigger issue.
Right, yeah.
So what we learned is you have to be so clear going into it what everyone agrees to do.
Yeah.
And if you haven't clarified that, then that's where the egos came in. And as a result, that collaboration will cease to exist in its current form when we stop funding it. We'll still fund the organizations,
Right.
but they're not yet ready to play in the sandbags nicely together. Is that what you asked, or am I just totally random?
No, that was great. I mean, that's just a frequent experience. And so I think that the final thing you said about not being ready to play in the sandbox together is such a astute observation, which is that there is an organizational maturity that you kind of have to hit before you're going to be. And I kind of feel like that's my own story, right? You know, we matured over time, and we finally got it. You know, we finally were able to not only talk about it, but also model it and build in the infrastructure, you know, to do it. And part of that size too. You know, I mean, you have to be at least a little bit. You have to have a little bit of staffing in order to be able to do this kind of stuff. So, sorry, yes.
Yeah, I'll say that for organizations that we work with, I feel like they're working within a culture and a system that ask them to be almost like double personality, because as the sector and philanthropy begins to change to be more collaborative, we're wanting people to exhibit those skills of shared measurement and knowing what your skill sets are and how that leverages another person's skill sets by some funders. And then we have other funders who are doing things in a status quo way, and those, neither of those are better than the other. They just produce different results. And so if we're really results and focused, then I think collaboration is most often going to win out when you think about how to get to some of those larger systemic changes. And so that idea of having compassion for not just the people we're working with in the community who are managing this around what does it really take to participate in collaboration, but just even with ourselves, what does it take? And again, so it's like we're in the middle of this sea change of culture, and we have the ability to actually be the change of that culture. And so I know we ask ourselves a lot in our organization, how are we actually practicing what we preach? And sometimes the answer is right where we want it to go, and sometimes it's not, because we're human beings. And so how do we be compassionate around that, but then get back to the grindstone?
Get rise strong.
And then you mentioned earlier that power
Differential,
power differential. And to me, I think that sort of what Jean mentioned earlier with the trust level. So if you don't have that trust with that relationship, then it's not really ego, but it's just the inequality or the perceived inequality. You know, so I always try and approach it as we're here to help you, not you don't have to
put them
perform
in
for
the
us
center.
or whatever. So what can we do to support what you need? And really that just takes it, just shifts it a little bit.
It does,
And I think that you can get the collaboration or the true partnerships that way if you still have this perceived inequality. It's too difficult.
Well, you just walked us into the second thing I was going to take us to.
I didn't even know.
You did, which is trust over control. You know, and one of the frames that I've been thinking a lot about recently is so Geo. I didn't say who Geo is. What? That was a bad assumption that I assumed everybody knew who we were. That's terrible. But we, you know, Lori mentioned that we're a community of 500 grant makers, but we're driving a change agenda. We don't think the status quo is working. We think that things have to be different in philanthropy in order for us to really achieve at our peak potential. So over this whole course of time, we've been trying to move practice. We've been saying, come on guys, give more general operating support. We've got to give more multi-year support. You've got to take a learning orientation because these are complex problems, you know, all of these sorts of things. And when you dig underneath why some of this stuff isn't happening, and when you dig underneath what the challenges are in the relationship with grantees, why folks aren't getting general operating support, it comes down to trust. It comes down to the fact that you know, when you ask nonprofits, we did this whole exploration. Well, why don't you think funders give general operating support? Because they don't trust us and they want to control it. You know, like that's the perception that we're conveying when we overly script, you know, the funding that we want to give to our grantees. Yes, of course, program support totally necessary in certain contexts, and you can do it in a way that's respectful. It does not convey a lack of trust. But that was the baseline answer that we got, you know, when we asked that question. So I'm really intrigued by the question of what will it take to remake foundations to be more trusting and trustworthy institutions. So both sides of that, right? We need to trust more, lead with trust rather than suspicion, and we need to make ourselves trustworthy. And I would say that there are lots and lots of ways in which we have not been trustworthy as a sector. You know, the fear that goes into nonprofits when we have a change of program officer, because or when we say we're going to go through a strategic planning process. You know, these are things that they don't trust us to hold their best interests at heart. They don't trust us because they've been through, and it's us collectively, right? There's lots of great actors, and also the other thing I'll say is that we're all doing the best we can, and we have good intentions, and sometimes these are, you know, unintended consequences of some of the things that we're doing. Like, who says the strategic planning process is bad? But it sometimes has unintended consequences for the folks that we fund because, well, I know, I might be shaming people in this room, but I don't know I'm shaming you, so you don't have to raise your hand. One of my biggest pet peeves is funders who say they're going to put a pause on grant making while they go through their planning process. No, nobody gets to put a pause. Like, no nonprofit gets to put a pause on their work while they're planning. And I understand why it's possible for funders. We do it because we can, you know. But there's lots of ripple implications to that should be really considered very carefully before we do something like that. So we pulled together a group of funders and nonprofits in the same room, and we used design principles like human-centered design principles to go through this conversation about what would it take for foundations to be more trusting and trustworthy. And it was really profound. You know, the nonprofits, there was one woman in this room, I didn't know her personally, but she was invited through a consultant that we were using, and she had absolutely zero hope that it could change. You know, she was a nonprofit leader, and she's just like, this is just it. It's just a nasty part of the business. You know, there is no chance of trust. And that was a real eye-opener for me, because I know a lot of the funders. We were in San Francisco, so she's a San Francisco nonprofit leader, and at a respected institution, and you know, and I just have, you know, I know that these are good people trying to do their best. And then there are some things happening that are causing at least this woman to feel as if there's no hope to actually be in a trusting relationship with some of their funders, which is really tough. And then that whole point about accountability and control versus trust. One of the nonprofit leaders in the room said, you know, grant-making standards are draconian. There's nothing says I don't trust you than more than 30 pages in triplicate. And I was like, you know, that's right. I mean, I raise money all the time, and we just kind of go through the process and we do all the, you know, like paperwork, and we don't think of it as a, you know, as a lack of trust. But it is a signal, right? It's a signal that we're sending that, you know, so our question is like, what would be different if we led with trust, if we led, you know, rather than, I think a lot of times foundations build up their whole machine around that one time they got kind of screwed, you know, or that one time that things went a little sideways. And so the policies and practices are built up, and, you know, donor advised funds, this doesn't really apply to, but in you know, in institutionalized foundations, you know, all of our due diligence and all of our checks and all of our repeats on paperwork and all of these things are out of a accountability mindset that is probably not based on your highest and best grantee. It's probably based on those folks that you don't trust, but you apply it to everybody. And so that was something that made me sit back and think for a little while.
Yeah, sure. Saying you don't trust, but maybe they're new and you just don't know them. So it's not a matter of not trusting them, you just don't know them. Yeah.
No, totally, absolutely. And I'm not, you know, I guess what I'm calling for is it's just more contextual, you know, just even having that conversation, right? Like one of the things that came up, I don't remember who said it in this room, sorry, brain not functioning all the way. Someone said, you know, like, we aren't totally explicit about the it was you, 3 to 5 years. Sorry, I was getting there. And that's how we all are, right? Like we don't want to call our shot on the front end, right. But that alone is such a huge. I mean, it's a little tweak. It's a little tweak to say, you know, our intent is to be with you for the next 5 years, and so, you know, so we want to know what's going well and what's going badly and how we can help. And so one of the things that came out of that retreat that we did was, you know, the question that came up in the small group was like, can you scale trust? And that gets to all this other stuff that's underneath it, right? Like, you have 75 grantees. You know, you're a program officer with 75 grantees. I don't know if any of you guys are in that kind of context, but how in the world do you build relationships built on trust with all of those people? If you're a program officer, that feels completely impossible. You know, so that's one issue. You know, there's some that you know deeply, and there's some that you don't know at all. And so, what's the differential of how you should think about it, and what you should do in those various contexts? So, one of the ideas that came out that one of the participants, a foundation leader, was going to go try to pilot in his own organization. It was a Blue Shield of California Foundation. Was the idea of actually having like a spectrum, like putting grantees in like various categories and calling your shot up front, you know, with the grantee. Like, we know you, we think that you're great, we are with you, you know, we're just gonna, like, this is your go forth and conquer money. You don't need to check in with us all the time, you know, so long as you keep performing, we're all set. Or, we need to learn from you. We want to be your learning partner, and so this is the way that we want to engage with you in relationship, because we have a lot to learn, and we want to learn from you. You know, so these are just different postures that, if there's an explicit conversation on the front end, might help with some of that trust. Or we don't really know each other that well yet, so this is a getting to know you grant, and and there's this much, this is what I'm hoping for at the end of the grant period, that we'll both have a better understanding about, whatever X, Y, Z. I see heads nodding. Anyone have like pushback or reflections, or why that won't work, or?
You want to talk about it? We are actually trying to adapt similar by putting people into buckets.
Yeah.
With our foundation and the folks that we have invested in for several years now, looking at them a little bit differently than those that are brand new and those that we want to get to know. So it's very similar. That's why we're nodding so much. Because Tina Marie's going to present that to our board in a couple
November
weeks.
18th,
Yeah. So it's really a new way. There may be a separate application for folks, or so we're actually exploring that. That's why it's resonating with us.
Well, that's great. When you came to it, I mean, you guys should have come and told me that 5 years ago. We would have. But it just felt like such a, like it feels overwhelming. Like when we talk to program officers about, why do I feel like I'm going to fail at this? I feel like I'm going to fail at this because how in the world can I do it with the scope of work? How in the world can I do it when I've got basically program officer jobs are set up to move a lot of paper. There's a lot of paperwork that happens. So one of the things that my colleague Lori lifts up in this new publication is we have to create the space so that collaboration can thrive and so that trust can be built. And part of that creating of the space is that we've got to clear some things off the deck, clear some other things off the deck. And some of that might be the kind of transactional parts of the grant making relationship. Yes.
I have a question on this. Being the corporate foundation, we pay into our foundation each year. And this is a prime example. From an operational perspective, we are hugely challenged right now. So we aren't giving, we're maintaining giving. We have to pull back. But that's part of the reality of not doing a lot of multi-year gifts because we don't, from a year-to-year basis, we don't understand. And another piece with us is a good chunk of our giving, we have our local communities be the ones who make the decisions on the giving, not us.
That's fantastic.
And so we need to have applications submitted every year because this external committee is reviewing the proposals and making the decisions.
Yeah.
So I guess, from that perspective, it's not an issue of trust, it's an issue of reality.
Yeah.
And so how do we then convey that effectively to the community? And we do. I think for the most part in our communities, there's enough understanding and we're there and we're doing capacity building work and that sort of thing. But I think in other situations when that's not the case, but that's kind of the reality of the funding, how do we help nonprofits understand that element of things?
Well, I think that there's, so you are corporate funders are always have a unique set of constraints and challenges in this regard. A couple things that quickly come to mind, but I want other people to offer up their suggestions. So there's how you charge your local community decision makers can make a big difference, right? So I have been privy to grant making decision processes that go a little something like, well, we gave them money last year, so we shouldn't give them money again this year because we should spread the money around. And so some people, that's their value, and if that's the value, then you are kind of sending a signal that the grant making decisions are a little bit capricious or idiosyncratic and not based on performance. And so I think that being really clear about why you're making selections, what that's based on, that there is not a you've gotten a little too much from us in the past 3 years, therefore you have to take a couple years off, or all of those kinds of things, because those are the kinds of things, those are the policies that we create that from a grantee perspective, they're like, what? This goes against every single thing I've been working for, right? I'm trying to build a strong organization. I've got my metrics. I'm working hard. I'm taking a long-term view. And you got bored, or you whatever? I don't know what it is. I'm sorry, I'm overplaying this just so, so part of what what my role is, because we are a community of all of you, is trying to do some of the like straight talk, you know, truth telling that nonprofits just can't do. They can't do it. You know, I've been in a situation too where I have had a funder tell us that they were taking a year off from us, and I didn't push back. You know, this was a while ago, but I didn't push back. And at the time, it felt bad and it felt weird, and I didn't understand it. But I was young enough in my career, and I didn't, you know, feel like I had the backup to say it. But those are the kinds of things that just, I mean, it's like with this trust question, we are all working from such a deficit situation because we're having to battle against the combined experience with all funders that these nonprofit leaders have, right? So you guys might be the most trustworthy organization that they could possibly encounter, and they're still like, I don't know, you know, I got into it with this other group down the road, and 3 years in, they just pulled the rug out from underneath me, and my budget, you know, my budget got completely blown up. Raquel?
Yeah, I was going to mention this sense, and you've mentioned it several times, and you said it again just right now, but kind of quickly in what you were saying, and that is, you said something to the effect of, and that's fine if you want to make your grants that way, but let the grantees know that that's the value that you're working from. And so it just made me really think about how much do we consciously work from a place of knowing what our values are and our working assumptions are, and then how that informs our investment decisions. And so for SLHI, you know, we really work from a strengths-based perspective. We really believe that community has the solution.
Yeah.
And so we tend to make then investments that are probably higher risk than other people because we might not know what the solution is.
Yeah.
We most often don't, but the community does. And so we try to shepherd the process of them trying to get to that. And that's just based on a set of values that I think we hold very dear. And though we're not explicit about it every day, it's a natural part of our framework and our languaging that it makes it.
It's in your DNA.
It's in our DNA.
It's in your DNA. And that's kind of what we're talking about is for organizations that say they want to be collaborative where it's not yet in your DNA, how do you do the kinds of things you need to do to make it be in your DNA? And then for all of the rest of us who have it in our DNA, we still have checks. You know, there are still things we can check ourselves on. We're going to have our collaboration conference in Houston next week, and there's going to be a plenary session about the Hill Snowden Foundation, which is this teeny family foundation that works on social justice and a lot of youth organizing. And collaboration is in their DNA, and it took them like 40 years to get there. You know, it took them, they were a small family foundation. They had like a external fiscal sponsor tides helping them do their work, and then they evolved and they evolved. And they finally got to a place, but that's one of the key messages that the board chair wants to make certain comes out in this process. I mean, I know you guys are a younger organization, and probably some of your legacy culture helped you gave you a jump start to where you are.
But it hindered us too.
Yeah, I'm sure. Yes, exactly.
The joke was if there was a van or a computer in it, we funded it.
Yeah.
So
that's capacity, right? You need a computer. Well, anyway, so one of the things that Hill Snowden talks deeply about is like the characteristics when they hired for their exec. They did a culture-based search. You know, they tried to find someone whose core skill set matched the collaborative DNA that they were trying to put out there. They also they basically not require, but it's written into his performance plan that 30 or 40% of his time is out there trying to make these external collaborative connections. So it's a explicit. I mean, there's lots of really interesting little mechanisms that they put in place. And again, this is a 3-staff, small family foundation. We always try to pick examples like that because it's stuff that anybody could relate to. But you're totally right that the values basis of how you're operating is really, that's what culture is based on, right? So if you haven't expressly talked about what are those values you hold dear, you're not able to say, now is this decision, whatever this decision is over here, aligned with what we say we really care about at our deepest core, or is it not? and if it's not, you know, we'll probably need to reconsider it. Someone else wanted to say something on this? Ellen?
So what about the challenge then of a staff perception of values versus trustees?
Yeah, I know. So as I've been reading about culture, so I've gotten, you know, I get this, it's fun when we get on a thread, I get to go out and just do all this kind of reading and research, and Ed Schein is one of the guys who's like written most about culture. And one of the most intriguing pieces of his book that a light bulb went on in my head about was microcultures. So every organization has a bunch of little microcultures, and so there is a microculture of the trustees, and then might even be a microculture of the operations staff versus the program staff. And there might be, everyone's like, yes, I know that. We're one of those weird groups that have the ops people who come to us and the program people who come to us, so we hear both, you know, it's like, we hear it into both ears, like what some of those challenges are. And so it is a deft leader who's able to make certain that those conversations happen where there's an alignment, you know, where the trustees are aligning, or the staff is lining up with the trustees. I don't want to say that it's directionally that way, but so that there is an institutional culture, and that institutional culture is valued and held and lived by wherever the touch point is.
What was the gentleman's name?
Ed Schein,
Ed
it's
Schein,
like
okay.
Schein or something. I mean, he started writing, like, his book is like organizational culture. Like, he wrote the first one on it or something like that, and then it's in lots of different editions.
Is it interesting, or is it one of those really
No, it's kind of boring. It's kind of really boring.
You're recommending a boring book?
No, what I'm saying is, I basically what I'm saying is the
I'm going to
opposite
delete
of
my
that
comment right now.
which is that there was one really useful nugget in it, and the one really useful nugget was this thing about microcultures. Because that's what we're having to think about. I mean, so, yeah, I hope you guys are having fun, because this is sort of
Jane,
one.
you don't have to read the book.
I'm not at all.
What you should do is read Gito's next two publications on
There you go.
culture, and everything you need will be in there. So it's 2:30 there, too, just so I know. Okay, good. Just making sure what my time situation is. I can remember it was 2:15 or 2:30. And where was I going on my great situation?
About the trustees.
Oh, yes, thank you,
Comment,
thank
yeah.
you. Okay. Thank you. Thank you for just forgiving that little brain aneurysm. Okay, so when we did this work a while ago about, you know, what's going on, what's underneath some of the power relationship issues, what's going on with, you know, with why nonprofits feel like they're not trusted, and why grant makers often think that the nonprofits are, you know, wacky and not doing good work or what have you. And so we were starting from the premise that these are all well-meaning people, particularly trustees of foundations, right? Like you don't go on a foundation board because you want to muck it up. You know, you're not trying to do. What you're trying to do is do the level best that you can at the job. And so what really was illuminating for me, and it kind of goes to this microcultures. I wasn't calling it that at the time because I didn't have that language, but when you think about, like, whatever the constituents are who are being served on the ground, you know, like the homeless people that are the beneficiaries of nonprofit services, there is a whole set of worldview and experience and, you know, disadvantage and everything that group faces. And there's a huge gap between the people who are being served and the nonprofit staff members who are serving them. But, you know, then there's a gap between those nonprofit staff members and the nonprofit board of trustees, right? So there's like 3 gaps just within the context of the nonprofits that are doing the work. And then there's another big gap between those nonprofit institutions and the staff at foundations, right? But there's probably a little bit less of a gap. You know, there's probably a little tighter connection, maybe socioeconomically, maybe experience-wise, what have you. And then there's another quite colossal gap between those people who are staff inside foundations and those people who are trustees of foundations. So you have to consciously bridge 5 gaps in worldview, experience, maybe a socioeconomics, education, all of these sorts of things, and privilege is the kind of main thing. I mean, I think that the biggest Achilles heel to foundation boards is privilege. You do not understand the felt experience of someone who has struggled and had structural racism, you know, through their whole life if you come from a point of privilege. So you have to work damnably hard to bridge those gaps. And that's one of the things that a deft leader who's trying to line up the values would figure out how to do. You know, figure out how to get those trustees to have, and this of course doesn't apply in most corporate contexts, so, but to get those trustees to have those aha moments, to know what they don't know, to know where their blind spots are, and to understand, you know, where St. Luke's has already gotten, you know, that the people who are actually in the experience, you know, who are uninsured or who are whatever else is going on, have a lot to bring to bear on what the solutions are. And I think it's not the prototypical way that foundations have acted over time.
Kathleen, do you have any, oh, sorry.
That's okay, and then Lori,
No, go ahead.
Any examples in your national experience of private foundations or public foundations who have a community trustees just on the grant making side? So we have a 3 trustee board that are appointed for life, which is fine. But I mean, in terms of the grant making, is there any tips you have about other organizations that have said, okay, just as part of the fiduciary responsibility of the organization, we'll bring in outside people?
Well, a lot of foundations have to. They're more like community advisory committees or
For
kitchen
private
cabinets.
foundations.
Yeah. The
Okay.
Grable Foundation in Pittsburgh has one. So
Okay.
Greg Bear is the CEO there, and it's a family foundation. So, I mean, one of the things that they were recognizing is that the insularity and homogeneity of their board was causing them to have big blind spots. You know, I mean, there's if you don't have folks who are informing the leadership decisions, who have some of the street view, you know, who've been on the ground, either running a nonprofit or, you know, what have you, it just makes it really hard to import that empathy. And so Grable does it. I'm sure I'm blanking. I know. Let me, you know, I could give you 5 examples, not from standing right here.
No, that's
when
fine.
I get back. Grable's definitely one that does. So I just want to move through 2 more quick. Well, I guess you know, a couple just big picture things, and then I want to get down to kind of brass tacks and hear from you guys some of the practices or strategies or things that you think might be helpful to move culture in the direction of being more collaborative. So the 2 final big picture things, you know, which we've already talked about, is just about humility, leading with humility rather than brand. And you know, I think lots of foundations are incredibly good at that. You know, so much so that they kind of tamp down their own voice. You know, so there's a difference between being humble and being silent. You know, you can lead humbly and still be out there arm in arm with your grantees advocating for something to change that needs to change for the community to succeed. But at the same time, you can do it by putting your grantees out front and saying, you know, we're behind you, we are with you, you're the ones who are doing the work. So that goes again to traits, right? So one of the stories that I just love, so the Ford Foundation, I don't know how many of you guys pay attention to the Ford Foundation in New York, but they semi-recently went through a leadership transition. And I got to talk to the board, he's now the board chair, but at the time he was the search committee chair, Kofi Apentang, about that search. And the new guy, Darren Walker is a Texan, and he is a beneficiary of Head Start, you know, and he is previous nonprofit leader in like a, you know, complete economic development organization in some part of New York, Brooklyn maybe, I can't remember, Harlem. So he like came up, you know, he has like the street cred himself, and he was a vice president inside the Ford Foundation at the time the search went down. And you can imagine, lots of people probably wanted the Ford Foundation job, right? That was probably quite a wide pool. And so Kofi was telling me that they were kind of overwhelmed by the search because there are all of these amazingly credentialed people, like former ambassadors, and, you know, like unbelievable set of candidates. And so he realized that the board needed to do their own soul searching and to get their values, you know, really crystal clear before they could make that decision. And they ultimately decided to do a trait-based search rather than a credential-based search. You know, so there's sort of a minimum bar, right? You need to have a certain level of experience, but kind of all the candidates who were putting their hat in the ring had that. But then they decided that what they're really looking for is someone who's humble, someone who probably might be one of the smartest people in any room, but doesn't have to prove that to anyone. And is curious, asks lots of questions, is able to be out in the field with grantees and be in corporate boardrooms. She also has that ability to move between different people, different groups of people. And so that landed them with Darren Walker. And Darren, I have to say, he's inspired me. He's an unbelievable leader for that organization. And I think a huge reason, a big piece of this is his built-in empathy. Can I steal one of these? Sorry.
I actually brought
You brought this for me. Thank you. I have a little, been fighting a little cough, and I ran out of my water a long time ago.
And if you need another, let us
know. No, I'm good now. Thank you. I just loved that. I mean, I just loved that they rethought, usually what happens is the search consultant goes out, finds 10 people, they narrow it down, and they bring you those 10, and you go, oh, I like her and him, and we'll bring those 2 people back. And that's not a bad way to do a search, but when you're just so clear about what are the values that we want expressed in this person. And he's really doing some amazing things, for the organization, trying to live out those values. So anyway, that's my humility example. It's pretty exciting. So let's let's move on to kind of what are the right processes and systems and things that you need to do in order to be able to be a culture of collaboration. I've got some ideas, but I'd love to hear from you guys. Checking my time again, which is so good. So there are structures that actually impede collaboration. I've mentioned a couple. Did any other come to mind for you guys? Things that might be happening inside your foundation or inside other foundations you've seen? I should say it's probably not happening in any of your foundations, but that actually impedes collaboration. I've got examples. Giving out grants 4 times a year. That makes it hard. I see absolutely, there's logic for why you give out grants 4 times a year. It makes total sense from an internal perspective. But it makes it hard to collaborate because sometimes you need to move. Sometimes you need to, the timing of the work does not line up with the timing of your grant cycle. What other ideas people have?
Just when you have transition with new employees and veteran employees, I won't say old, but veteran, and sort of like, well, that's the way we've always done it. And just sort of trying to be able to break out of those norms. Or, we tried that 5 years ago and it didn't work kind of thing. So how do you kind of push beyond that? And we always say model the behavior you hope to see in others.
Yeah, exactly.
So, but that gets hard because they start, there's turf involved.
Of course there is, yeah, totally. So people on the bus, personnel, absolutely. Well, Ellen, I haven't directly addressed your question, and I don't know if I've given you any hope that, about your own feelings about collaboration. But that skills thing is real, like having the right skills, and a lot of it's trainable, absolutely, but some of it is, yes, of course it is, and some of it is, you need to hire for it. So an example along those lines, which I love, and it's in the pub, is Greater Houston Community Foundation. They have, so I don't know how many of you guys are big enough, maybe the corporate folks probably have this, but to have spelled out competencies for each position at the organization, like what are the competencies to be a program officer, what are the competencies to be an accountant, and what have you. Well, the competencies that the Greater Houston Community Foundation spelled out were that they're hiring for, that they're assessing against. Most of them, many of them, are related to being good collaborators. So it's taking a customer service, perspective, adaptability to change. That was one of the ones that I think you're struggling with. Accepting personal responsibility. There's this great list about establishing relationships. So I think that's one of the structural things that can help, get the right people on the bus. But then from a training perspective, GEO ourselves, we've been for years sending every single person, once you've been at GEO for 6 months, you go out to a facilitative leadership training at the Interaction Institute for Social Change. And that gives everybody a common language. We talk about the maximum appropriate involvement in decision making. So that's sort of just about internal collaborative culture. And so we all have we know the terminology, like is this a consensus decision? Is this a decide and announce, meaning is this a gather input and decide, so that we know we're setting the right level of expectation. Because I think a lot of times that's where things get goofed up in our relationships with grantees too, as we go out and we say, we want your opinion. And then we go do whatever the hell we were planning on doing anyway, But so if you say, hey, we're going to get lots of opinions, then we are going to decide, how best to incorporate that feedback. It's a little bit different than folks thinking that they actually, that there's a consensus that's coming up there. So training along those lines, I think having a uniform or a collective experience related to some things like that is one way to internalize it. What other kind of practices, Jean?
I think from a program officer standpoint, we can't expect program officers to have all the answers to every question that the trustee or the CEO will ask. Because if you're truly collaborating, so much of it is unknown. Where I think the old ways, and I came from that, where when you made a grant presentation, you had to have everything crossed and dotted, and you couldn't say, I'm not really sure, I'll get back to you on that. So I think we have to, as the board and as the CEO, say, that's okay. There's a lot of unknowns, and get back to us, and we're not going to hold, your feet to the fire if you don't know the answers or something doesn't go well. And that's I know in our organization is a huge culture shift to say we're going to make mistakes, and I always tell people we're not heart surgeons. We're not. If we make a mistake, no one's going to die.
One of my former board chairs says there are no philanthropic emergencies.
But we've made ourselves as a sector so important that we all think we're just so incredibly important. And it's not. We're not saving. We are saving people's lives, but it's not a critical situation.
Yeah, it totally is. That's really great. So any other? So I wanted to mention a couple examples that I just was thinking about. So the idea of focusing on administrative costs, like I'm trying to nail it down to the particulars, right? Like what are those small things that make it hard? And so if your trustees are hyper-focused on like what's your administrative ratio for the foundation and how do you compare to these 3 other foundations, but if you're trying to do things differently, if you're trying to be on the street in the work with the grantees, that takes more time. That takes more staff power, that takes more manpower. So the Heinz Foundation in Boston, little, again, small foundation, the CEO, Beth, fully admits that they're out of whack from an administrative ratio with their same size peers. It's intentional. They decided to do that on purpose. And it's really working because they are conveners. They are, they're doing a lot of collaborative work. So that's one example. Another, Jim Joseph Foundation in California, they're a Jewish education funder. Each of their program officers only have between 10 and 12 grantees. So what's the average? How many grantees do you guys, do program officers typically hold? More than 10, I guess. Yes. I mean, that seems like a really low number to me, but it's very intentional. And what is your number, Jean?
I'm sorry, before I was 20.
Lori, okay. No, I wasn't trying to. I thought you were sharing your numbers.
No, I was making a sarcastic comment to her.
He was saying, oh, you probably only have 1 or 2 when I deal with all the nonprofits in Maricopa County.
We will not sit together here next time you come out here.
No, it's great.
It's going to be a hard time, is what he was saying.
No, I'm sorry. I misread the situation. I didn't mean to chastise you like the teacher or whatever. That was not my intent at all. But I guess risk profile is another thing that comes up. I think a lot of times boards particularly have a mindset of protection, like we need to protect the assets. We need to, accountability, lead with accountability. But there's a little shift that, what about being accountability for movement against the mission? And what does that take? And I think that it might take a broader risk profile sometimes than we all typically adopt. We kind of stick in our safe lanes most of the time. So that's one of those other conversations that might help with collaboration. Is anyone else coming up with other ideas? Yeah, Ellen.
Well, kind of on the flip side of that, I would imagine for really big foundations, part of it is we got to get that money out there.
Yeah.
And it takes a lot of time to collaborate with somebody else to figure out how to do it. And so it's like, let's just figure this out and do it.
Yep. No, totally, absolutely. That is a total pressure. Right? Yeah. Just getting the money out the door.
It's like protect the money and get it out.
Right, exactly. Exactly, and that's why we go with safe bets, because if you're doing that, you don't have that relationship all the time.
And And to piggyback on that, it's also like identifying organizations, like Tina Marie mentioned, that we want to bring to Arizona. So it takes some time to develop those relationships with people we're not aware of. And so we joined the 100K and 10 just to kind of identify. But it's building those relationships with new people to bring best practices to the state.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, there's so many dimensions to this collaboration question. One really inspiring example that I think I'll leave you guys on. So he just joined my board, so I've gotten to know him a little bit better. But it's a guy named Starsky Wilson, and he's the Reverend Starsky Wilson, and so he's the head of the Deaconess Foundation in St. Louis, Missouri, and he came to Deaconess. You know, he's a pastor of a church. He's been a nonprofit leader in the community. He has a lot of personal experience with, felt experience, particularly that was relevant when Ferguson, when Michael Brown was shot. And his foundation had already put the posture of wanting to be community collaborative leaders. So they hired Starsky. His joke was, yeah, my board's kicked me out of the office. Like, again, he's not supposed to be inside all the time. And when Ferguson happened, they were able to mobilize, and Starsky was the right guy in the right seat at that moment. And they were out, he was out standing with the protesters, praying with the police, trying to be on both sides of this as a CEO of a foundation. And the governor tapped him to head the Ferguson Commission. So he was the chair of the Ferguson Commission. That was this, multi-sector collaborative to look at what needs to change so that the tinderbox of race relations in communities like that isn't as easily sparked. And so just Cheryl, what's Cheryl's last name? His board chair, there's a whole set of things that needed to happen for that guy who was the right guy for community leadership at that moment to be able to lift up and have that, to be in that role. And a lot of it had to do with what their board was setting them up for, setting them up to be about the mission, not the organization, to lead from a very broad perspective. So that's a story about, having the right context for collaboration and then the moments there, and then he's able to step in. So the reason I'm so passionate about this content, both culture and collaboration, I think that these are two of the focal areas, the muscles that we most need to build. On culture, just being intentional about our cultures, it's a little depressing, but many foundation boards are not paying attention to that when they hire the new CEO. They're paying attention to field expertise or just a couple other things. This woman named Faye Tversky at Hewlett wrote this publication called CEOs as Artful Jugglers, and one of the quotes that was just very unabashedly put in there is like, oh, I'm not interested in all that internal stuff. It was sort of like, I just want to be over here and think big thoughts and have big ideas. And so my sense is go to a think tank, or go to a university if that's what you want to do. But when we get upset with the lack of progress, when we get worried about whether or not we're making the most difference, we try to shift our strategy. And my sense is that what we're probably needing more focus on is people and culture. Do we have the right people in the room? Are we lining up our culture behind the strategy that we intend, like collaboration or like whatever else? So that feels like a real important muscle for us as leaders in the philanthropic space to be able to build. So I'm excited to be in this conversation with you guys. And I hope to be able to come back to Arizona again.
Anytime.
I was here 2 years ago, and so it's fun to be back and just thanks for all of your really wise thoughts and deep